I was just saying that there has been this particular warmth in this room, this energy of people who've had a really good day. I think several of you were at a conference in the day, and obviously that went very well because there's a lot of happiness everywhere. And we're delighted that this is what you have led this day to, which is the launch of this very, very special book. I was talking to Nandini and Neha just now and double checking with them, and we realized that September 2 years ago was when Nandini first told me that they were thinking of putting this book together. And then, very strangely and serendipitously, Neha and I met up without knowing. We kind of introduced ourselves to each other and say, "Hi, I'm Kartika." She's like, "Hi, I'm Neha." And then we're like, "Aren't we supposed to talk to each other about a book?" And we met at some other place entirely. And then the conversation started up again. And it's taken 2 years of very hard work. I know this because we heard about it for the first year while they were trying to get the conversations done, the writing, the rewriting, the editing. It has been a complex journey, I think. We've had the most wonderful time doing this as well because as editors, as publishers, there are several kinds of books you do in the year, but not too many are as, what shall I say, timely and as in some ways difficult to bring together, partly because we're not experts, we are generalists, and it takes editors who are experts to be able to tell us. And so there was a little bit of that reverse process where the editors were saying, but this is not how it is. And Nandini and Neha would be like, no, in this is the language we need to use. This is the vocabulary. This is the tone. And it's important to get it absolutely right. So we've had quite a learning curve here. And of course, you know Neha, right? Marketing has also had a very sharp learning curve with her. So we've been like working on getting this together, working on trying to get the book as far as possible now that it's going to be launched. And I'm really, really glad you're all here to see it start up formally. To all the contributors who are here and some who are not here, a very special thank you for being so patient and for making it to this date with us. I'm going to just say that thank you to everyone and hand over to Neha and to Nandini. Neha will take the evening forward and we will have conversations, discussions. I hope you will be a very participative audience. Thank you again. Over to you, Neha.
Thank you, Kartika, and the entire team at Westland. Everyone has put their heart and soul into this. And of course, to all the contributors who we'd like to have up on stage. And so may I maybe all sit down together first and then we can have a little chat. So Nandini, would you like to come and join us here? And Purnima Vishwanathan. Purnima, would you like to come up? Yeah. And Zainab Patel. These are all the, we don't have all 11 women contributors here today, but those who are. Zainab, Kavita, Dr. Kavita Arora. Sidra Nair, would Sidra join us, please? Kairavi Bharatram. And Dr. Firoza Godrej, of course. Please come up on stage and join us. And Janani Iyer, please. So as all journeys begin with a story, we heard the story of how we met our wonderful publishers. Nandini and I also had a long 2-hour car ride in Bangalore and made complete commitments to each other about putting something like this together. And then as we started talking one by one, many of us just found ourselves gravitate towards the possibility of this book, making it happen. And I think we've all given each other the courage and the conviction to actually do this. It's been quite a long, hard journey. And as you can imagine, a book that is about our mental health journeys, about our stories of resilience and healing, but also of finding hope and courage. And it's really been a homecoming effort. And I don't think it would have been possible had we not found this tribe and sort of made the journey collectively. So as the day has gone by, many of us have been at the India Mental Health Alliance annual convening. This was the first of its kind and just took place downstairs actually. And we had over 230 member organizations from across the country who are part of this alliance. And so the energy in the room was absolutely amazing. India Mental Health Alliance is a great champion of lived experience mental health narratives. And so it's just serendipity that we were able to bring the book together on the same day and do one launch there and then now here with all of you. This is more friends and family. So firstly, thank you so much to our parents and our children and our cousins and aunts and uncles who are here in the room because it feels even more special than a birthday. And it's more special, I think, for certainly all of us, perhaps, because we are, in a sense, in a moment, reliving 20, 30, 40 years of our life. Our life stories have unfolded in this book that you will all sort of witness. And you'll hear from each of the contributors a little bit and perhaps relate to some parts of different stories, but would love to invite you on this journey of homecoming with us. It's been quite a revealing process for us because we've realized that some of these difficult conversations we have not had even with ourselves. And we've taken this courageous moment to say, actually, I feel quite embarrassed about this, or actually, this part of my story I don't really want to own. And this journey of, what might be the path to wholeness has really been sort of this guiding light to say, what does it take to be your whole self, regardless of the setting? Regardless of the context, regardless of who you're talking to. Is it an investor? Is it a publisher? Is it a lived experience person? Is it a psychiatrist? Or is it even your parents? Regardless, can we actually be our whole selves? A lot of stories we heard today earlier were from young people who talked about finding safe spaces and people who can hold space for each other. And so, in this context today, this book is coming alive. We see it as a really courageous and small contribution to the beginning of this conversation. This whole idea of lived experience expertise is essentially planting the word expertise outside of perhaps a clinical context or an education context and literally saying we are all the experts of our own lives. And we are now sitting in the driving seat of our own life and we've been through many experiences. And today, whoever we are is a combination of all the experiences and all those memories and relationships, some healing, some broken, that we carry within us. And so our journey towards this wholeness has really been about that kind of self-revelation to ourselves. It's been difficult conversations that have happened, also very liberating conversations within the family. The book has been a reason for us to talk to our family members, for us to be able to get to know parts of our stories. Maybe different people had different versions of the same story. And so we actually asked each other which version is legitimate, which version should carry, and how we can all actually come together with our different versions and yet have a story as a family. And so it's with all of these sort of reflections that we've sort of arrived at the homecoming here today. And so may I kick off this evening by firstly thanking all the contributors, but also all of the family and friends and students or teachers or mentors who have helped us arrive at this moment in time. It's quite special when it comes to lived experience expertise because we are saying that there is expertise here together with clinical expertise, together with academic expertise, and how the culmination of all of that is really what makes the right kind of care possible, the right kind of support possible, and also the right kind of healing possible for all of us. So with that, first, if we could all perhaps lift our copies of the book and do a little unveiling, if we'd all like to stand up for that, and then we'll go around the table. Yeah, you just need to pull the ribbon off. Wonderful. Please do have a seat, and Nandini, handing it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. This is such a special moment for Neha and me. Both of us are huge lived experience advocates. As an author, I realize stories have the power to transform. Unlike numbers which merely inform, stories transform. And I think a lived experience story, putting out a lived experience story, is perhaps the most courageous act one can undertake. And I think each of us whose stories form part of this book has put it out with great authenticity, intentionality, and courage. This also brings me to the question of why do we put out our stories? As someone who's also written about my journey, I'm a person with a lived experience of suicide loss. I lost my husband to suicide loss, and that formed the theme of my book, Left Behind Surviving Suicide Loss, how I rebuilt my life after a most tragic loss. That also raises a very important question. In fact, I was discussing this with some of the contributors today. Why do we put out our stories? Is it just to grab eyeballs? Is it just to, are we just our stories? That would be very, very reductive. As someone who also works in the space of suicide care, I think each of us puts out our stories, whether it is in suicide care or in mental health, because we are wanting to bring about systemic change. Societal structures and systems need to change, and this is where lived experience narratives have such a powerful impact. I, like all the other contributors, we're very, very particular that lived experience narratives, people with lived experience, are not mere footnotes. We are not add ons. And I just loved what Dr. Kavita Arora spoke in the morning about not just fitting us into systems, but dismantling dysfunctional systems and ensuring that we are at the center. It's time that lived experience narratives, people with lived experiences, move from the margin to the center, from the periphery to the center. And I do hope that Homecoming would make that possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nandini. So, Purnima, would you like to kick us off today?
I thought this would be slightly easier. But yeah, I'm gonna try. Um, this is a beautiful moment for me. This is definitely a homecoming moment for me. As I talk, there may be some things that are heavy for some of us here. I'll be talking about sexual abuse and suicide and self harm. So, if maybe you'd find that heavy, then just see what you may want to do to support yourself. So, my name is Purnima. I'm a psychotherapist and a teacher and a researcher. I'm also a survivor of child sexual abuse, rape, and I live with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I am also a part of systems, mental health systems that have re-traumatized me, that have felt unsafe, that have felt unempathetic. I live with bipolar 1 disorder and autism. And all of these identities, the trained professional that I am, and also the person who's been broken open by pain, shapes the work that I do now and shapes my chapter in Homecoming as well. For a long time, my life was defined by silence and shame because I didn't know how to talk about or share or where to talk about, the trauma that I went through. As a child, as a young adult, I carried trauma that I didn't really have words for. Like, how do you even go to someone and say that this happened to me? And there was so much shame around that. And I just pushed myself. I thought if I worked harder, if I excelled, I kept moving, I could outrun it. But trauma, unfortunately, lives in the body, and it caught up with me. There have been many years, almost 5 years of my life, where I felt I had no way out. I was initially diagnosed with treatment resistant depression and then treatment resistant bipolar disorder, and I had lost all hope. There were years when depression and hopelessness were so heavy that I could barely breathe. I would wake up in the morning and question why it's another day, and that I don't want to see this day through, and I don't want to be here anymore. I planned my death, I rehearsed it, I thought about disappearing, and I attempted. The only thing that would keep me going at times was the people who loved me, the people who were there for me, and just thinking about the kind of pain that they would go through if I killed myself it would just break me. But I really thought that nothing was going to change. And I lived accepting that nothing was going to change, but at the same time, it was too hard to continue living, and I fought this battle of life and death every day. But things changed. Things did change. I never thought that there would be life. I never thought that there would be hope or light in the darkness. But there was hope, there was recovery, there was joy. There was love, there was connection, there was community. And things didn't change for me over a day. It wasn't a miracle. But what changed things for me was people. And I never thought I'd say that because I never believed in people. I never knew how to make connections with people. But it was my community. It's my people who were my anchors and who saw me through all of this. And they held me sometimes gently, sometimes firmly, and refused to let me go. They gave me care, dignity, and hope at moments when I could not find any in myself. And that community got me to stand up, to see the light, and brought joy into my life, brought hope into my life. And if I'm standing here today, if I'm sharing my story with all of you, they are the reason that I'm here, and they are the reason that I'm alive. And this book comes from that place. My final part is going to sound like a thank you speech for an award, but I can't help but do this. But I really want to thank people who've been my anchors. My mom for being my rock, my person, and the reason for what she calls a rebirth, and it is definitely a rebirth for me. My dad and my brother for showing up at my doorstep whenever I needed them, no matter what the time or the day was. Vasant for holding me when I couldn't hold myself, for loving me, for never judging me, and always respecting me no matter what pain I was giving him. Bakul, who's not here, but Bakul believed in me every time I hit rock bottom, and always saying that what I needed to hear the most. Mitali for holding my shame with warmth and gentleness and never letting go. Mehek for standing with me as a co-traveler in work and in heart, and bringing so much warmth and clarity in the messiness of life. And finally, Dr. Abhinav, my psychiatrist, without whom I wouldn't be here, the reason for my recovery, the reason for the hope I hold for my life today. Thank you, all of you, for holding space so gently for me and warmly as I shared what I thought would not be so easy. It wasn't easy, but for making it easier, thank you. And read Homecoming, buy it and read it.
Purnima, thank you so much for bringing us all into ourselves and really showing us the mirror, but also bringing us together in this moment. I'd love to invite Zainab Patel. Please come and share a little bit. Yeah. Zainab has also received the Chief Minister's Award just today and is here from Mumbai.
Thank you, Neha, and good evening, all of you all. I must salute your courageousness to travel and battle all of Delhi's traffic to be with us today. Kudos. A round of applause to all of you all. I'm actually going to start by reading a small paragraph at the end of my story. And it goes like this. My story is not one of perfection or of fairy tale endings. It's a story of persistence, of taking one step forward when the ground beneath you feels unsteady. Today I carry my scars not as symbols of defeat, but as badges of survival. They remind me of where I have been and fuel my commitments to create a better future for myself, for my community, and for those who come after me. My name is Zainab Patel. I am the only non-biological woman on this panel today. I am a trans woman, and I come from a very, very small and very modest, economically, socially modest family from the bylanes of Parel. And in a world that actually demands conformity, sharing my own truth as a trans person and as a queer person is an act of courage. I think when I heard Purnima speak, I wanted to retract my words and say everyone sharing stories here, listening to stories is also an act of courage. Because it takes immense gut to be able to relate to stories, to take it within you and to take it back home and to act on it. In Homecoming, when I was narrating my story to Nandini, I think kudos to Neha and Nandini, one for building such a personal connect with everyone. I don't think it was staged or it was made to appear like, okay, I have something in common with Neha, I have something in... Yes, I do have things in common with Neha and Nandini both. But for me, when I spoke to Nandini, it was absolutely amazing to see what kind of shared journeys we are on. Apart from the fact that we have lived realities that crisscross, some on the intersections of poverty, some on the intersection of gender, and some just being part of a bad, mean world. I carried the silence after coming out for a very long time. In fact, as a trans woman, as a so-called community leader, we've been told to tell our stories many times over. People applaud for us. Some people even pay me and pay me really well to tell my story. But I don't think someone really understands what happens when you recount what happens to you in your life. As a young child, battling through suicidal tendencies, I self-harmed 7 times, and all before the age of 16. I was sexually abused by my very own family. And like most parents in the 80s era would do, instead of taking me to see a psychiatrist or a mental health professional or a medical professional, they decided what it was done best. They signed a contract of silence. That contract of silence is something that a lot of us are guilty of even till today. We do that on a regular basis in various fronts. But what my parents did was actually take it a step further. They decided to take me to a faith-based healer. Something is surely wrong and it has to be exercised out of this person. So I didn't know what was more harrowing. Me going through my gender identity issues me being sexually abused, or me going through the rites of exorcism many times over. One day I finally claimed that I was cured and I decided to take my life in my own hands. But I belong to a very marginalized community of trans people. And when I was narrating my story to Nandini and Neha, and I was telling them that unlike some other communities, I won't say most, and I don't have the liberty or privilege of saying most, we really don't have the time to grieve. We don't have the chance to grieve. We live in small houses, one room. That one room is your bedroom, your kitchen, your living room, everything together. 90% of my friends who I started off with in 99 have either died due to HIV or committed suicide or were murdered. 90%. I was narrating my story today at another place, and I was told, and I reminded people that the average life expectancy for a trans person is just 4 decades. And in that 4 decades, I want to be mentally happy, even if the world is cruel. And when I see so many faces in this room, I'm reminded of the fact that, yes, if there is anything that can change people in the room, it's a small group of committed people, all of you. Thank you.
Zainab, thank you so much for bringing our attention to our identity and all the multiple identities that we hold. I would now like to invite Dr. Kavita Arora. Kavita also is a child psychiatrist besides being a lived experience expert. And I'd love to hear how you're wearing all your many hats today and on the journey of homecoming.
So many stories in one day. And this, I think I'm still with the two stories we heard, Poonima and Zainab both, although I've read. But every time a story is told, I think we all find different parts of ourselves in it. So you're going to hear 9 brave hearts you are, all in one evening. And Nandini and Neha actually sat down and spoke to each one of us for several hours, each one, and then tried to put it into words with all honesty. So I actually think this book is or has been a journey for each one of us, almost sacred. I've gone back and forth in this journey because I tell the story of the impact of living in a household with somebody else who has mental illness. So I speak about my mother, but I speak about it from my vantage point. And I've often wondered about what her story really was and whether I'm doing it justice. What is the truth, really? My father has a very different version. He was an adult. I was probably 1 year old when my mother had her first episode of schizophrenia. So I've grown up all through my childhood thinking that that is what motherhood was. But he had a different vantage point, and my brother, who's elder to me, he's not here right now, but he's I've had a journey with him in the last few weeks as well, since it is very difficult even within the family to sit down and have these conversations. And I needed to go through that journey myself. So the first time when we talked about it, Nandini, Neha and I, and then when it comes back in print, it's a very different experience. I said all of that for 3 hours. That's how it reads. But I think the important part was each time that I went through an iteration, I realized that evoked another set of memories. And could I stand by every word of what was finally written? I think I've really struggled with that dilemma, because once it goes on paper and it's out there and all of you read it, you're reading my truth and you're going to see it as the truth. Can I stand by that truth? And I think that's one, I think I've gone through that chapter again and again and again. And I wondered, and I still wonder, what my mother would have thought about it and whether she would have agreed that that's how her life was seen by her daughter. She's no more, so I can't ask that question. So one of the things that I often now say to people who still have their family around, please have the conversations. Try and get closure if you can. Attempt the difficult conversations. You'll get something more than what you have right now. So this conversation for me is putting my story out into the world and hoping for a conversation from the ether, from several mothers and several daughters. I've already had a very rewarding experience when my brother read my story, and he has a different version. And he reminds me that I've forgotten some of the bits and that he has forgotten other bits. So I'm very happy that we get an opportunity, even though it's painful to revisit, because in the retelling of some of these incidents, why I've forgotten them is possibly because they were unpleasant. And in the retelling of it, he tells me that why he remembered was because he was very scared for me. So I've conveniently forgotten because he's elder to me. And he's the one who's telling me, this is what you did and this is what I did. So each of these versions is, and I keep going back to versions because everybody thinks it's the truth. A story is truth. It's a life lived. But all of us have different perspectives on it. So this is my perspective on that little girl who grew up in a household, not having the words for what motherhood was, for what a household could look like, because there was no comparison. If that's how you grow up, then I grew up believing this is what families are like. There was no comparison. There was no thinking about this is good or bad. This is. It was much, much later when I met with some of my friends sitting right there, Minchi, Vandini, Inakshi, people we call our Gutergu gang. They're still together 30, 35 years now. That I realized that some households were not like that. It was possible to talk to your mother without fear. And sometimes mothers were consistent in their love for you. And they didn't leave while they were present. And I think that opened up a very different set of things, which was far more emotional. I was still a child. When I look back now, I wonder what would have happened if I'd had the words or the understanding or the awareness that this was mental illness, because I didn't. It was not till I came into college in medical school that I read about it, and then I went home and said, I think mom has this. She has paranoid schizophrenia. I think I've read it for the first time in this book. And I think once that incident happened and things opened up, and then I understood the words for it and got the vocabulary for it, that is when an entirely different journey began. Because then it's obvious. And the reason I'm saying this is that when I sit today in my privileged space of being on the other side and being sometimes the psychiatrist in the room, and I see a young person or a child whose mother is either unwell or whose parent or a family member is unwell, and there is this entire bit of silence around telling the child, telling that little girl sitting in front of me that your mother has a mental illness. There is still silence around it. I never met my mother's psychiatrist. I was never taken there. I was never told she had a psychiatrist. Many, many years later, I found out that there was someone that my father used to take her to. But today, when I meet someone who has a mental illness, I struggle with the same dilemma of what about the other people in the family? Does that little child in the home know that it's not their fault, because that's also a perspective. You grow up thinking you're doing things which are wrong. So that little girl sitting across from me is still the little Kavita that I'm probably speaking to. I wish I had spaces where I could have gone and asked these questions or known about. So conversations, why are we having this conversation? Why is it that in the retelling or recounting of our painful stories, why have we taken this on? Why is the book important? Because this is reality. It exists and we don't have books around it. We don't have lived experience, ordinary, relatable people books around it. We either have sensational stuff or we have silence. So that's not the truth. This is the truth. And I hope that many, many such stories become far more visible and mental health stories become ordinary. Everyday household stories in every household, so that it can be talked about, it can be laughed about, it can be cried about, it can be joked about. It becomes ordinary, not sensational, not invisible, just like everything else. And that's my hope in the start of this movement. I'm going to take up Neha and Nandini on their word that this is the first of a series. So I hope that this is going to be 100, 200, and 1,000 stories that start off from this movement and carry on across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita. It's stories that inspire others. It's never once happened that I have shared and not had many stories back as well. So we hope that you will pass on some of these wherever you might go, and perhaps that will inspire other conversations. I think also just to say, Kavita talked about closures and conversations in the family, and so to bring my whole self into the room for a moment. My mother too has paranoid schizophrenia, and is very much alive and very much blessing this moment, sitting in Mumbai, cheering us on. My father is here today in support, and we as a family have gone through a lot of hardships because we lost my younger brother. He died by suicide 5 years ago, and so for us as a family, it's really been the journey of a lifetime of multiple illnesses across multiple generations. But the conversations that are happening today within our family, the ability for my mother and my father and myself, and together with family and friends who I see around, some of whom have known me for 42 years, some have known me for 20, 30 years. It's just so wonderful and liberating to just be able to, for once, be one's whole self with everybody, regardless of context. And so thank you for inspiring that conversation. And in that spirit, I'd now like to invite Sidra to come and say a few words.
Okay, the next time I'm not going fourth, I'm going first, because after a bunch of coherent people, for someone like me to speak at this podium becomes it's very high bar. So Neha, please, the next time probably I can be the first one to speak. I think Purnima said a lot of things that I want to say, so saves me time. I can move on to other things. I want to start with I might cry, but just I'm all right. With a verse in the Quran, it says, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْيُسْرِ يُسْرًا, and it means certainly with hardship comes ease. And if anything has been true for my life, I think it has been this verse. This experience and opportunity to stand here in front of you, to be able to share my story, it's at an intersection of two of the most prominent features of my identity. And first, my identity as a Muslim woman, which was shaped by my upbringing in a village. I was born and raised in a village in Uttar Pradesh on the India-Nepal border, where my mother took care of me and my sister during the day, and she used to sew cloth bags at night to make some money to uh, bring us up. And my father worked as a migrant in a factory in Surat, away from his home and his family, away from us. And my second identity is of a woman who's lived with depression for 12 years. And when I was diagnosed, I'm not young now, when I was diagnosed, I was 21 years old. And that young woman had no idea what was happening to her. I could not comprehend what was happening to my body. I could not comprehend what was happening to my mind. So there really are only two prominent feelings that I'm experiencing at the moment. One is privilege, because not everyone gets to share their story. I get to stand here and share it with kind people like you who have lent your ears to me. I was telling my ammi about Nandini and Neha. My friend Bakul put me in touch. And I was telling her that there are other people who have also shared their stories. One is, her name is Dr. Firoza Godrej. And, the Godrej Almari that we have, her family owns that. And I was telling, there's another person, her name is Aparna Piramal Raje. And wo VIP wala bag jo hai, that her family owns that. And my mother's response was as honest as it was innocent. Unko bhi depression hai. And do they also have depression? And she was just... There's a lot to unpack there, but that's of course for some other time, perhaps. And I talk about my privilege in this way, that I get to... My name is next to the names of some people who have Wikipedia pages. They know my name, and I am seated next to them. I don't think this opportunity comes easily for people like me, for my community, for the people in the place that I come from. And the other relates to my identity of having lived with depression for about 12 years, and the sheer joy of being validated of my experience. Because for years, I think I shouted my lungs out, telling people how I was feeling. And I was dying for someone to tell me that my feelings were worthy of being accepted, believed, maybe. And for years, I found validation from others. But I think by sharing, over the years, of course, I've been on medication. I've been feeling much, much better. I live a relatively stable life at the moment. And but the ultimate validation, I think it came from myself, as cliched as it sounds. It came when I started forgiving myself. I stopped relinquishing my space to make other people comfortable with my emotions, because I think and I believe that it wasn't my job to make them feel better, unfortunately. And I'd end with another cliche. It's a quote from Albert Camus, and I used to have been reading it for about 12 years constantly. It's a painting in my home also. It goes like, you must have heard of it. In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer. And that makes me happy. For it says that no matter how hard the world pushes against me, within me, there's something stronger, something better that pushes right back. Thank you.
Sidra, thank you so much for those words and also for those tears, some of which are in all of our hearts. And we may be smiling here today, but I think we all carry a lot of grief, a lot of pain, a lot of loss. So we celebrate your resilience and also everyone here who may be carrying a story within themselves. We have the privilege today of talking with you about some of our hardships, but not everybody does. I hope you do. I hope this is a conversation starter at a different time and place. But would love to hear reflections as we go around the room later as well. So please do share. Would now like to invite our youngest contributor of the book, Kairavi Bharatram, who wrote a book actually when she was just out of school as well, to first talk about her journey for children. And today has captured some of her story for adults as well. And so, Kairavi, over to you.
Hi, I'm Kairavi Bharatram. I'm an entrepreneur, content creator, and author. My journey started when I was around 17 years old and I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. And part of me feels that my story is not worthy of being in this book because nothing traumatic happened to me to trigger that. And because of that, for years, I lived with guilt of having depression and anxiety because I felt that I was not even deserving of that. And eventually, many years later, Dr. Shailaja encouraged me to share one of my poems, and it got published as a children's book. And that showed me the power of sharing. And when other people read my book and told me that you're so strong, I was able to view myself as stronger. And when I was given the opportunity with Homecoming to share my story again to a more adult audience, I was happy and I said yes, of course, because if my story can help anybody, then it would feel more worth it what I went through. But my style of writing has always been in rhyme. So when Neha said that we have to share something today about our journey, I thought I'll write a poem. So I have written a poem last night called Homecoming, which I will share with you. Homecoming to me means the feeling of coming back to who you were before things started going off track. The version of you that was sparkly and brightened everyone's day. The version that didn't have to be asked, "Are you really okay?" Because somewhere along the journey, that radiant Keru was gone. Her laughter started fading, her aura became withdrawn. She lost confidence in herself and was saddled with self-hate. She despised everything about her, from her personality to her weight. Being with those thoughts all day felt like there was a bully in her mind. It would twist what anyone would say, even if they were trying to be kind. All she longed for was a break from the things her mind would say. Waking up was the hardest. She didn't want to face another day. And somewhere she was convinced that she was surely losing this fight, and she slowly started to believe that she would never get any respite. So she convinced herself that she had no choice. She had to take things into her own hand. But luckily for her and everyone else, things didn't go as she had planned. Some experiences she had made her suddenly open her mind and see that life may be still worth living, even if she has depression and anxiety. These illnesses didn't have to define her, they could just be a part of her life, and that between the days of darkness would be some days worth being alive. Days she felt special, she felt loved and she felt strong. Days she had a purpose and felt like she belonged. And yes, there would be days of doom and gloom where everything turned back to grey, but this time she had the experience to know it would eventually go away. When she dusts off the insecurities and the shame, she won't find something new. Under all the struggles is still hiding that radiant Keru. She's learned, she's fought, she's healed, she's grown, and now she's ready to come back home. So even when the clouds stay longer than they should, and she struggles to see any of the good, she'll remind herself this pain won't stay. The sunrise will bring with it a bright new day. I also want to take a moment to be grateful earlier in the day, I thanked my parents, but I really want to thank my grandparents. My dadi, who is not there anymore, but she was way ahead of her time when it came to mental health. She believed in it, 20 years ago, where no one spoke about it. And my dadu, who has been by my side through this journey of the last 10 years, every step of the way. We were at a doctor's in London. There was no waiting room. We stood outside for 1 hour in the rain just in case I wanted to come out early. He flew all the way to Chicago at 2 hours' notice because I was in a center and I wanted to leave. So we always say that in many people's mental health journeys, they say that the grandparents never understood because they didn't have the education and no one spoke about these things. But I just feel that you don't need education to be compassionate and to be kind. And I learned that through my grandparents. So I hope that, you can be kind to everyone around you so that you don't have so many people with lived experience anymore. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kairavi, for that. And I think as with parents in the room and grandparents in the room, it's such a blessing for all of us. So thank you for bearing witness to this beautiful journey of Kairavi's as well. And now I'd like to invite Janani. Janani Iyer, would you like to share a few words?
Namaste everyone. I'm Janani and I'm a teacher at the Sri Ram School. What is my story doing in this book? I'm a teacher, I must have figured it all out. Well, I grew up in multiple classrooms where shame, fear, punishment, daily beatings were as normalized as teacher going into the staff room and having a cup of tea. That's how the day would start every day, and that was my first lesson. Should I say that was my first education in anxiety and fear, which walked with me everywhere I went after that. When I met Neha and Nandini and they asked me to be part of the story, I was very reluctant because I really didn't feel I had much to tell. Other than, yeah, there's a daily story of anxiety, but is that not everybody's story? Is that not how many of us have been in classrooms where we've been told that's the way, that's how you build character and that's how you get disciplined? Only to realize as I went over the story with them that what it had done to me. Every day going to school was nothing less than surviving a 2-hour full-blown anxiety attack, coming back home, and also dealing with certain dysfunctions of home and not having any space to talk about it. When while going through homecoming, that's when I realized that what I had survived, and also I'm grateful for what I'm standing at today. Because there's a lot of resilience I built along the way, but it also shaped a lot of my work. And as very aptly titled, the story is that I was taught trauma, but I teach kindness, because the kindness did become my lesson plan. Every classroom I walked in, there were only 2 lesson plans I was armed with. One was, how am I letting every child in my classroom break out of the shame cycle that they get caught in? And what is the kindness check-in points I'm going to leave them with, and can they be kind to each other? Because that was where I was standing, and that was a lens that I had only developed. I had no training in education, but my teachers were trainers in the sense that they taught me what a teacher shouldn't do. So I didn't feel I needed any B.Ed after that. And thankfully, Sri Ram was progressive enough not to care about a B.Ed. So I thank them for that. We were always way ahead of our time. So that helped me actually walk into, when in 2007 I joined the Sri Ram School, I was already struggling with depression. Seeking purpose in my work, I didn't know where to start. It was at this time that I started therapy, and that's when I started unraveling all the anxiety and the shame that I was carrying, which was so core in me. This is the time when I was also given a lot of encouragement to start the work of community work within the classroom. I started feeling that mental health solutions don't have to just come in therapy rooms. They can start way before in the classroom if somehow we create cohesive communities where kids can also come and share their vulnerable stories and still be held. We had kids who did that. they gave that community to each other. They came out, they talked about what they were feeling. There were good days, there were some days and they were sharing more, there were some days they were not sharing much, but that was okay. It was all collectively at the end of the year what we became. Every class that started out as not getting along well with each other suddenly became the class that was getting along beautifully because it gave the space to each other. My story of shame and oppression of school taught me that this is what education has to be. It made me believe that it doesn't matter what curriculum any child is following. The child could be enrolled in the best world-class curriculum, but if the emotional well-being of the child is not being nurtured and nourished with safety and love, nothing will be achieved. And that is what has given me a lot of purpose in my daily work with children. I do feel that the choice is with us, whether we want to continue with the cycle of shame, smallness, and silence, which is so easy to do in a classroom. We can always use our power script on kids and just get away with it. Or we flip the gaze on it and we say, no, we are going to become a system which will heal. We will become a system that will uphold dignity. We will become a system that will give safety to kids. And we will just do that. There's no question about it. We don't have to worry about time, curriculum. It's just a daily intentional effort. I think my story, if you read it, may not be a story that will be something that needs to be turned into a movie or something. It's a very simple, regular story of anxiety and depression, which I'm sure many of you will find resonate in parts. But I think what I'd like for you to focus in that story is that what it has helped me see in the classroom, the lens it gave me in the classroom. And I hope that we are healing many more kids who are not falling in the shame cycle. I also want to thank 3 people who uplifted me during this phase. When I joined in 2007, of course, first is my therapist. She helped me through and through. Second is my husband. Thank you, Yogi, for always being there. And my dearest friend whom I met in Sri Ram School, Vasu Datta, she really uplifted my confidence on days when I thought I just couldn't do it. In a month or 2, I was ready to leave school and go, and she just helped me. She was my champion through and through for the years that we shared that room, and we laughed so much. So laughter became a healing thing for us. So on that note, let's all just smile and feel happy. Thank you.
What a great positive note to end on. I'd like to invite now Dr. Godrej, who is always talking about, her story is titled Canvas of Compassion, and is always talking about being kind, lots of love, and lots of laughter. Over to you.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you, Nandini. Thank you, Karsika, for publishing this book. It is long due and coming, and I hope it does very well. So, what I liked about this entire day that I've been here since about 8:30 in the morning with pleasure is we're all part of an alliance. India, mental health, that's fine. But the word alliance, an amalgamation of people, quite a number of us who've come together to take this challenge of mental health forward. I compliment all members of the Bharat Ram family for lending their support so wholeheartedly to this new platform, which has been in the making since 2 years. When Neha first approached me about the book, I said, how much time do I have? And she said, we'll make the time for you, and I'm really grateful. They were long sessions. I couldn't have written it better sometimes, I felt, of talking about something that has been in my life for the last 4 decades. When my daughter was 10 years old, she had a lot of problems academically. And I'm a trained teacher, and I knew there were problems, but I had no tools to solve these problems. The school that she went to was an extremely high-powered school, but unfortunately, the professionals there didn't even know what the word learning disability was. And once she rang me up, she said, "I've got a child and a parent sitting in front of me. What is that word your daughter's been diagnosed with?" I couldn't believe it. I said, dyslexia. So she said, "Spell it out to me." And I spelled it out to her. And I said, something is really wrong in the system, in the education system here, when a professional cannot diagnose academic things which many children must have been facing. When we were in school and we had children like this, they said, "Oh, please, you don't have to read. Skip the number, go to the next one to read the paragraph." And we were too polite to laugh at these students, but we knew what the teacher was trying to say. "Oh, this kid is dumb, let's move on, let's not waste time." I'm sure you have all had some experience because there's such a cross section of society that we grow up with. Dyslexia is easily overcomable. Dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, there are tools for that, and children sometimes they know very well how to use these, and they outgrow them. And now, of course, with the iPhone and the iPad and all the apps that you have, if you can't spell, it doesn't matter. If you can't add, it doesn't matter. If you can't draw, it doesn't matter. There's someone who doesn't answer back to you and call you names. They're happy to deal with that. But there was a worse issue that was to face us. Compounded with all this, there's a topic called OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. And I was speaking to a very well-known cancer specialist once who helped us, put us in, and he was a child specialist for children's leukemia and things like that. He said, "We've got institutions like this in this school, and don't worry. We all have OCD on a 0 to 10 scale. Each one of us, I promise you, if I asked you and quizzed you just now, you say, yes, you've got this little phobia, that little phobia. Everything has to be neat. You can't leave your socks like this. Your shirts have to be folded. Your sari has to be folded." But it doesn't debilitate you. It doesn't prevent you from having a family life. You all can go out. You all can pack your bag. You can travel from place to place. This is what our 11-year-old was facing. So the learning on one side, when all children go through a normal childhood, we could overcome that, no problem. OCD also brings out something called bad behavior, acting out. And they lose all control over themselves. You get angry, you lose all control over yourself. So it just ends up in a fighting match, which is not healthy for a child's relationship with a parent. But it had to be tackled. You couldn't let this thing go by, and she couldn't lead her whole life in this sort of tension way. And now she's 45. She's coping quite well. Not very well. None of us are perfect. I'm not perfect. And but it was quite a journey. We're at an advantage here in India because we come from joint families. I think it's an advantage for me. Many may not agree. After you see these horrible serials every evening in your home, that the Sasuma is doing something and the daughter-in-law is cooking up another storm. Don't laugh, because these women and children see this every day. It's an addiction. It's a terrible addiction, these serial programs, but they do have a message. So joint family is helpful. It was hard to explain to grandparents what is actually happening. Why are you spending so much time with Raika and not with the other child? So over the years, that got sorted out as well. But if you're in a nuclear family, it's very difficult for parents to cope because there's no support system. We have a super support system in India, and you go there, you learn, you train, you come back, you apply. They teach you the they give you the tools of how you can apply your life to all the problems that you're facing. And I know a lot of people, there's nothing wrong in being depressed, honestly, but I am not a depressed person. I like to be very positive in my thinking, and for me, that has been really the first step. And as I said in the morning, even if you don't know the person and if they walk by you and they're scowling, it doesn't cost you anything. Just smile at them. It'll make a huge difference to those few seconds in their life. So to be positive, to not look at the situation, the glass is half full or it's half empty. So look at the full glass and call it hope or whatever you want to call it, and go ahead from there. So mine is a different story. It's life, and we have to take it with all its warts and moles, and we can make it a very beautiful life for our children, for our community. There's lots of learning in this, and I'm really grateful that there was this platform to share this story, because OCD, if you don't trap it, if you don't catch it, it can only go in one direction. Huge depression. And another thing, everybody reads it in the paper. Every paper and every language today is talking about the biggest scourge that our communities are facing, and that's suicide. Every day in the paper, you read about a brilliant doctor, a brilliant IIT student. It's not easy to get into these institutions and these careers. Why? Why did they fall through the cracks? Why was the help not there to save this human being? And immediately my thoughts goes, what about the parents? How are they going to come to terms with that life? Gone, absolutely gone. So 2 things I told Neha I really want to focus on. Obsessive compulsive disorder, there'll be some gene that they'll find to put that one right. But suicide, I'm sorry, we need all the help that we can, whatever we're going through, to overcome that one. So that's why I'm here. And I want to end on a cheerful note. Smile. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Godrej, also for ending on that cheerful note. And we'd love to hear reflections from folks in the room. And as different parts of some of these stories might have related or resonated, perhaps you thought of a family member, or perhaps one's own life might have flashed back. But do have a little think, and going to those spaces privately or within your families and homes, and also feel free to share a little bit here. I'd like to just end with 2 people who are not here today with us, 2 of the contributors. Purnima, I'm just going to request to read out from Dr. Raisa very quickly, and I will follow up with Aparna, and then we'll open up.
For Dr. Isa, who now works in the very field that once left her feeling deeply traumatized, psychiatry. Homecoming gave her something invaluable. It gave her a voice. It gave her story a home. I often heard the message that reaching out for help is enough. But for her, reaching out was not enough. At every step, I encountered not safety, but new layers of trauma. There were violations that went against the very spirit of the Mental Health Care Act. There was involuntary hospitalization. There was loss of agency. There were physical restraints, chemical restraints, and practices that stripped away dignity rather than restoring it. These were not just clinical decisions. They were acts that contravened rights, and they left wounds of their own. In her chapter, she draws a painful and striking parallel. She writes of how her perpetrator once pinned her to the bed and forced things upon her that she did not want. And later, within the walls of mental health services, she was pinned down again, this time by those meant to protect her and care for her. The actions mirrored each other, blurring the line between the violence of abuse and the violence of a system that was supposed to uphold healing. For Raisa, Homecoming was not just about telling her story. It was about reclaiming her voice in a world that had repeatedly silenced it. The book is both testimony and truth telling. It is a reminder that mental health care must always be rooted in dignity, in rights, and in compassion. Her greatest learning from this journey is that while stories can be heavy with pain, sharing them is an act of courage. And in that act of courage, others may find recognition, strength, and hope. It is also a call for all of us that the systems designed to serve the vulnerable must do much better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And Aparna Piramal, who's not here with us today, she's in Oxford, but her book actually kicked off some of these lived experience narratives. It was called The Chemical Khichdi, of her journey living with bipolar disorder. And Aparna sends just this little message from Oxford. Our book exquisitely captures the challenges for individuals and for families, the gaps in the healthcare system, the black hole of mental health conditions, and the illumination that comes with it. It's an exceptional milestone for mental health care in India. I hope we can get it recognized as such to make sure that policy and care are much more humanized for the generations to come. The diversity of stories in the book is one of its biggest strengths. For my part, it's a privilege to be part of this cohort of incredible women, and I'm thrilled that Chemical Khichdi had some small role to play in the genesis of Homecoming. And with that, thank you very much on behalf of all 11 of us. You have sat through this evening with your hearts open and taken it all in. And we hope that the message of this book can carry far and wide through you and with you. But before you leave today, would love to just open the floor up, and if there are any reflections or questions or things that anyone would like to share, you're very welcome. We'll spend 15-20 minutes doing that.
Each story I could relate to, and felt that it was me talking. Every story. So I have also had exactly very similar one or the other issues in my life. I had a lot of issues with my son. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and had to go to the rehabs many times. I was a single mom, got divorced, and I can't even begin to explain. And I had also tears when I was, listening to all of you. I always have had this question or a really need that if we can have some social groups like some of foreign countries, not one-on-one therapies, which we have, like it's really nice here. But if we can have social groups where we can interact with each other and kind of uplift each other, and that'll be really nice. If I can really request you all to, have something like this. Thank you.
And thank you so much for bringing that up. Earlier in the day, at our annual convening of the India Mental Health Alliance, we had 17 different organizations who are all lived experience and caregiver collectives of the 230 Alliance members. So there are many that exist, and we'd be happy to connect you.
All of
But there is a lot of healing in kinships, and there's a lot of healing in coming together and just witnessing each other's stories. So thank you very much for that.
I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease when I was 11 years old, and I've been living with chronic illness, non-visible disability since I was 11. And as I grew up, I hated the word resilience. I hated it with all of my heart, because every single time I'd hear it, I wouldn't understand what about this messiness seemed resilient to people around me. And it almost seemed like the word resilience was only spoken about when I achieved something despite the illness. And the lightness that I'm feeling right now is because everyone who spoke did not say the word despite, did not talk about their achievements or did not talk about their experiences with mental health concerns by using flowery language. I think I'm sitting with the messiness, I'm sitting with the heart and the humanness of it, and I feel really grateful that I've gotten to hear incredible stories. So thank you so much.
A great initiative, and it has started with Deepika Padukone Paral. She came up first, and then it has become quite popular now. Now, I had a very straight question about my daughter. My daughter had bipolar, and as a family, one suffers quite a bit, and pressures and tensions happen. I would like to know and compare notes, just to know that whether it is only the community which can help or whether it has to be a lot of clinical solutions, because the kind of medicine that she had been administered by Wim Hans, she was almost reduced to be a vegetable. Almost every time she is under drugs and she doesn't know what to do. Now she is 45 years of age and we had to shift her to Bangalore to get all that medication. So can that medication stop and the community support can improve the situation? I would like to know that because some of you have discussed about bipolar. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. What a great question. And maybe we invite a quick word from Purnima and Kavita as lived experience and clinical experience experts.
Thank you for sharing that. And I honestly don't have the expertise here to really kind of say what might help the most. But I think to some extent, your daughter and you and your family would really have the expertise to look at what your daughter needs the most and what would be most supportive and helpful. I am not sure if it could be an either or, clinical or community, but from my own lived experience, I definitely thought that clinical was not going to help for me, that medication was not going to help. And there was a time when medications kept me alive. They kept me from killing myself. But at this point, when I see my current psychiatrist, I have also seen that medications can also help in the process of recovery and the process of bringing back hope. But that is definitely not the only thing that helped me. Of course, psychotherapy is something that really helped. But, like I already said, if the people around me were not holding me in the way that I wanted to be held right now, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be alive. So I think it's both the power of the community and also the power of clinical services, which are really empathetic, which give importance to lived wisdom of both your daughter and the family.
I'll try and add to that, although I agree with what Purnima is saying. I think the answer is that we need to do a lot more of what we don't do, which is a lot more community, a lot more family, supporting the family to support the person with the illness, and look at the clinical services as well. So I think this is, while sometimes we say, will this work or this will work? Actually, there are layers to the care system. And for most of us, the ideal situation would be that we do all at different stages of the lifespan and different stages of the illness. That's the ideal aspirational sort of care pathway. Because what we also understand is that a lot of what goes into bipolar disorder is also about personal goals and aspirations of the person and the family. It's not just about the illness itself, but what it takes away from you or what it keeps you from doing or what would make it meaningful for you to live with bipolar disorder. And that part, there is no medication or clinical service that can really take care of. Giving meaning to life and living with the disorder is something that mostly happens within the community and in the spaces of life, really. So I think I'd flip the question a little bit to say, what are we doing right now for people with bipolar disorder is not enough. And we need to do a lot more and combine a lot of things at different stages of the illness. It's an aspirational answer. It's not necessarily something that may be immediately helpful to you, but I just thought
Thank you. Thank you, Kavita. Rasi, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to say congratulations, Neha and Nandini, for coming up with this concept, for getting these wonderful ladies to be part of that book. Each one of them has spoken beautifully from their heart, spoken in their own way, shown their spirit. I know resilience is a bad word, so I'm scared to use it right now, but come across, had a difficult journey and come through to the other end and shown us all that that's possible. So thank you, ladies, and thank you for making IMHA a part of this book. At IMHA, we very firmly believe that lived experience is expertise, and lived experience expertise should come into forming policy, forming programs, and delivery of care. So I hope that one day all your stories can also help deliver better care to those who need it the most. Thank you.
I think Kavita put it very eloquently. There is no one complete answer. I think it requires lots of pieces. Now that sounds very unhelpful, but it does require lots of pieces to come together, whether it's the treatment, medical treatment, or whether it's the family support, whether it's really understanding and working together with the person and the family to figure out what really works for them. But it does require all those parts. I don't think there's one specific answer that will solve anything, basically.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I think we're going to start bringing this evening to a close, but really appreciate some of the comments and insights that have come through, some of the questions that have come through. And I wonder if, as we walk away today with our copies of Homecoming, what might we do next with it? I'm sort of asking myself also this question. What are we? I mean, we've gotten this far. Firstly, we've sort of gone through and somehow managed resiliently to just about survive and cope and thrive and get to this point in time. And so here we are. But where might we go with these stories? How would we like to sort of pass on the message? What would we like people to take away? Some of these sound really like, strong words around lots of tragedies and difficulties, and it can be quite hard to take in, quite hard to sit with, and certainly not something you want to carry. And at the same time, we all have these. It's a part of all of our lives. It's a part of our thriving stories. It's a part of what gives us our sense of purpose, meaning, impact in the world. It's what we'd like to tell. I mean, I'm a single mom. I'd love for my daughter to read this book. Hopefully, now that she turns 13, she does know a lot of what is in the book already. But I'd love to hear what she and other young people have to say about these stories. Being in print now, this is not a generation that needs to sort of be hush-hush. In fact, they have taught us what these words are, what they mean, how to use them, and whether to identify with them or to make them as one part of our identity. And so it's really the young people, and Kairavi, thank you for getting us started also with that mission at IMHA. But it's really the young people who are helping all of us find a vocabulary and giving us as the adults this kind of healing that we never thought possible in the course of our lifetimes. And we've lived 2, 3, 5, 7 generations here right at this dais. So thank you across all generations for the healing, for the holding and the nurturance that everyone is providing. And I hope you carry all of that together with the laughter and the love and the hope back into your homes and into the rest of your day and lives, and pass on the message of homecoming. Thank you so much for being with us here today. Thank you.